G'day guys, it's Jake here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to install SQL Server Express on Windows Server 2019. If you have any questions, leave them down below and like and subscribe to see more videos. But anyway, let's get into it. So first things first, this is a fresh server. So I'm going to turn off Internet Explorer Enhanced Security because I'm running this on a server operating system. And you can just search for SQL download. So we can hit download on here. Then this will download the SQL Server 2017 Express installer. So this is just a small application where you can do the installing of SQL Server Express 2017. So it's only 5 megabytes, it's not very big, but what will happen is it will download the installer for you and then install it. So you can just go basic to install the database server engine, but we're going to do a custom and hit install. So it's going to start downloading these files. So it'll take a few minutes to download. So now you have this window with the different options. So you can install a new SQL Server standalone installation or add features to an existing installation. Because this is a new installation, we're going to use that one. There's also the other options to install reporting services and SQL management tools. So what we'll actually do after this is we're going to install the SQL management tools because you can't access your SQL database or manage them through just the standard installation, except for like with PowerShell or command prompt or something like that. But if you want a GUI editor, you need to install the management tools. So let's start with this. So this will actually launch the SQL installation setup thing. You need to accept the terms. If you really want to, you can read them, but I don't know anyone who actually does. Then say next. It's going to do some prerequisite checks, and you can also check for updates before installing. I recommend doing that normally, but because we're just doing this for testing and for demonstration, we're going to skip over that. So here we go. It runs some more rules, and it passes our normal stuff and gives us a warning. So if you want to see what that warning is, you can click the warning. So we've got Windows Firewall enabled. If you want, you can see the rules in here. So that being really good, we can't actually click that, but if you want, you can go to that page by typing in go.fwlink. So this will give us some information on how to configure the firewall for SQL Server access, which we'll have a look at afterwards. So if we go next, you can now pick the different features that you want. By standard, you get SQL and some other stuff. You can add in more if you want to, or if it's needed. Hit next. So then you can give it the default instance or a named instance. We're just going to call it the default instance. If you want to give it a custom name, you can. And we hit next. It also tells you what directory it's going to put this SQL server in. So here you have your service accounts. If you want your service accounts to run as different users, you can set them up here. Otherwise, it will just use the default built-in user accounts to run it. But like say, for some reason you wanted your database engine to run as a domain user, you could set that there. And you can also set your database collation in here too. So if you wanted a different one, by default it's just Latin General. But you can click the customize and pick whichever one you want down here. So hit next. So now it's going to tell you your database administrator. By default it's just Windows authentication, and it gives you the SQL Server administrators in here. You can also do mixed mode, so that'll create an SA account, which you can document the password, which you can put in a password. I recommend documenting this if it's set up, and also some applications may need an SA user to be able to use the SQL install or to be able to access the SQL database. to be able to access the SQL database. So usually Windows authentication is fine, but sometimes you will need mixed mode. And yeah, if you do mixed mode, document this password and keep it somewhere safe. If you want to add additional SQL administrators, you can just hit add the current user, whatever you want to do. Also, you can change the SQL data directories and the other settings in here. I'm honestly not even sure what that means. File stream for transact SQL access. I've never had to use it, but it's there if you do need to turn it on. So then hit next. And then this says that Microsoft uses some open source software, and you need to accept the terms on the open source software agreement. And also, because we're installing Python as part of this install, it will also ask you to consent to installing Python or Python or however you want to say it. But you just hit accept, and then it's going to start installing. So then once it's finished, it'll tell you all the things that have succeeded. If anything hasn't worked, it'll say failed here and give you a description of why it's failed in there. And then you can also view the log of the install. So if it's failed, the best thing is to view the log, which is this text file here. Anyway, that's it. So now we've actually installed SQL. You can see that it's installed by opening up your services. And we should now have an SQL service. So there we are, and you see we used our default named instance of MS SQL Server, and it's running. So now one of the things though is by default with the new SQL Server Express, it doesn't install the management tools. So you can see here if we open this, we have the configuration manager and we have the installation center. So if you get further down the track and you haven't got the management tools, you can open the SQL installation center from here, then install the management tools. So what we'll do is now install these management tools, and this is actually a link to download SQL Server Management Studio, which you can actually do from a different computer if you want to, so you don't have to be on the computer that you have installed SQL Server on to do this. You can run SQL Server Management Studio from another computer and connect into your SQL Server. One of the things though is you'll need to enable I think TCP/IP or named pipes or something like that, but you will be able to you will need to connect from external, so you will need to enable those rules, services, and also enable the firewall rules. So while that's happening, I'll show you how to enable named pipes. So a lot of things will actually need this turned on to be able to work properly. So this is the SQL Server Configuration Manager. And you can see here, you can see the services that are running, and if you wanted to restart or stop them, you can do that from here. So as you can see, we've now stopped the SQL service. If we start the SQL service again, so it's running. Down here, we've got client profiles, which you can see shared memory, TCP/IP, and named pipes are all enabled. Down here though, for the network configuration, a lot of things require these to be enabled. So these allow connections from external in. So if we enable TCP/IP and named pipes, and then we'll stop and start the service again. So now that's actually running. If you want, you can also see what port it's running on here by going right click on TCP/IP and checking the IP addresses, and we can see here it's running on port 1433, which is the default for SQL Server. So if you wanted it to run on a different port for some reason, you can change this here. You can also make it use dynamic ports as well, but we don't want dynamic ports. I don't know of anyone who uses dynamic ports. I'm sure somebody does, and I'm sure it's there for a reason, but usually you just use this TCP/IP port rather than a dynamic port, which makes it a lot easier to make the firewall rule as well. So what we'll do as well is, while we're there, before we actually run the SQL Management Studio, in here, if we've got Windows Firewall enabled, you'll need to turn on or make a rule to allow the firewall to allow network traffic through the firewall and into the SQL server. That's if things are connecting to the SQL server from outside of the server. So if your software only runs on the server, you don't need to allow a firewall rule. But if you want network connection into the SQL server, you will need to open up that firewall. So they actually make a nice little script here, which you can just copy. Yeah, cool. So you can see there, you can do it manually, but why do it manually when they've got this here? So if we run, so right click there and click run, open a command prompt, and it will need to be administrator command prompt, which is lucky this says it will be created with administrative privileges. And then there we go. So that's created it. Oh, so it's deprecated. Anyway, it did complete successfully. So we should have that firewall rule. I'll just check it to make sure it's there. If we open Windows Defender Firewall, we want to go firewall with advanced security. In here, we should be able to see one called SQL port. So in here, we don't see it. Maybe I'll run this one. We'll refresh this view here. There we go. We've got SQL port. That might have been there already, and I just didn't look at it because it wasn't in alphabetical order. Anyway, we can check and see we've got 2 now, which is probably because I've ran the command twice. So I might just delete one, because why have 2 when you can just have 1? So anyway, there's that SQL port that was created from that script. If you wanted to create it manually, you basically just create one here with these same rules that are in here, but you know, where is it? So we want to allow that port in for anyone in the local subnet. Anyway, so now we've got that firewall rule done, and we've got the SQL Server Management Studio here. We can run that, because this will give us something that we can actually connect into the SQL Server with and see what databases and stuff are in it. So if we hit install, because it's already downloaded it from the last link. So now SQL Server Management Studio is installed. We need to restart the computer, which is easy. You just click restart. Sounds difficult, but it's honestly not. As you can see, I'm using a VM here. It's not an actual computer. Make it big. Make that full screen again. So here we go. We're back into the server. Oh, I'm going to turn this off. This thing annoys me. I'm not going to start that automatically anymore. So now, inside of here, we've got our Microsoft SQL Server 2017 folder, and we've also got the Server Tools folder, which is what we want to open. So now we can open the SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS as it's also known. So now this is an updated GUI, or like graphical user interface for the SQL Server Management Studio. It looks a bit different. It's more sort of cleaner and app looking. If you're using an older SQL Server Management Studio, it will look a bit different. And one of the comments I have on this is it takes a long time to open now with the newer version of SQL Server Management Studio. The older one opened a lot quicker, but basically once it's open, everything looks the same. So as you can see, we can use Windows authentication, which we've installed this with mixed mode security. So we can actually log in with this administrator user, which, as you'll remember from before, we set that as an administrator for the SQL server. If you wanted to log in as your SA user, you can change it to SQL Server authentication and use your SA password and log in. But we're going to log in with Windows authentication. So once you're into the SQL Server Management Studio, you'll notice over the left, you've got your Object Explorer. So in here is where you see your databases, which we don't have any. You can also see your security stuff here, so your logins. So you can see we've got that SA login there. And you've also got a bunch of other stuff in here. Polybase, we didn't tick that to install, I don't think. And anyway, so if you wanted to create a new database, you can just go new database. And we're going to call it test. In here too, you can set some other stuff. So you can set these different options if you want to. There is a lot of them. And typically when you're installing software, it will tell you what options you need to set. Anyway, we hit OK. Why did that not work? So for some reason, we cannot create a database, which I would have thought we should have been able to. So if that doesn't let us do that, see how this says create permission denied in database master? Let's go and see the permissions for the database master. So if you right click on master and go properties and view the permissions, we can see that guest has user, public has that. So you can see I don't have this. Let me see. So let's go here, logins. Let's go and try and log in with our SA password and see if that can do it. Alright, so we can do it as our test user, but we cannot do it as our domain admin user. So what we can do then is if we expand out security and logins, right click on my test administrator, we'll go server roles. So I've got sysadmin role, so I should be able to do it. Will just give me DB creator role as well. Let's try create a database now. Still can't, so let's connect back in with the SA user. Now this is one of the reasons why it may be useful to use mixed mode and have an SA user to actually do this. So what we can do as well is if we go to the properties on the master and go permissions, nope. If we go to the logins here and go, and what we'll do is we'll actually compare this mapping. So see how I've got DBO roles over all of these. So let's try and check that on the administrator. And if we see the user mapping, so what this does is this actually gives you access, this user mapping thing can set permissions over the databases. So for some reason when we've installed this, our administrator user hasn't got the user mappings over these databases. So what we can do is tick them all, and if we give them all DB owner, like so, DB owner, so now if I log out and log back in, and we'll use Windows authentication and go new database, still denied. Let's try restarting the service. So we'll open this again. Now this is real life. Sometimes you do things and they don't work the way you're expected. This did not work the way I expected. So this is how you actually learn things, guys and girls. Still got none. Alright, so let's go back in as the SA user. And we'll go into the security logins and let's check some other stuff. So we've got the sysadmin role. Possibly, we'll try this as well. We'll try running this as an administrator. This could also actually be a different problem. So that's saying username file server SVR01 administrator. I'm logged in as the wrong user. I'm logged in with the local administrator rather than being logged in with the domain administrator. Let's go view full screen again. So if we now try and open this, alright, let's see what happens when this opens this time. Alright, let's see if I can do it now. There we go. So that whole problem of me not being able to do it was because, did you see when I was doing this connect thing, it says test administrator, I was logged into the server as the local administrator rather than the domain administrator. So my permissions were right the whole time. Just for some reason, I was being silly. Anyway, so that's how to do that. If you want to, so that's how to create a new database. If you want to import a new database, you can restore a database from a backup. We don't have a backup file, but it's pretty straightforward. You say device, and then you find the back file. We haven't got one to do, but you find it, click OK, and import. Another thing you might want to know how to do is to be able to back up a database, which is pretty simple. Just right click on it, hit tasks, and say backup. Hit OK, done. So what that did was that backed it up to the default backup location, which is in there. If you want to change the location, you can do this and hit those dots and put it wherever you want to do. So say you wanted to put in the perf logs for some reason, type in a file name. One trick is though, you need to put .bak on the back. And remove that one. Okay. I don't have permission for that folder. So anyway, that's the basic gist of it. Now we've got SQL Server installed, SQL Server Management Studio installed, and we can run it. We can connect to a database. We can create databases and whatnot. If you wanted to actually see the tables, you can see them. We haven't got any tables. And also if you want to run queries, you can hit new query and run your query. So like select star from master. So like this will select all from the master, which won't work because we're not, hold on, that's not going to work because I just selected a whole database. So what you can do is go here, new query on master, and say select star from dbo dot spt monitor, and then if you hit run, that'll then show you what's in that table. Anyway, that's the basic gist of it. Don't forget, like and subscribe to see more, and we'll see you next time.